Solutions to Assignment 2 Financial Ratios, Part 1. We'll again divide this section into two parts. Okay, problem number 1. On its most recent financial statements, Beamer Air Products Incorporated reported annual sales of $7.5 million and an accounts receivable balance of $1.05 million. What is its days sales outstanding DSO ratio? Interpret the meaning of this ratio. If management offered more lenient credit terms to customers, what impact would you expect this to have on sales, accounts receivable, and the days sales outstanding DSO ratio? Okay, well the ratio is computed by taking accounts receivable and dividing by sales per day, sales over 365. The accounts receivable was given as $1,050,000. The sales, $7.5 million for the year. We divide that by 365, the sales figure, and we get a DSO of 51.1 days. How would we interpret that ratio? Well, assuming all of the sales are made on credit, they're all credit sales, then on average it takes once a credit sale has been made, on average it takes 51.1 days before they collect that sale. So what would happen? What would you suggest would happen if management offered more lenient credit terms to customers? What impact would that have on sales? Well, we would expect to increase sales. Some of the less creditworthy customers who have been rejecting, or you've been rejecting, may now be appropriately acceptable customers, and it should increase sales. But it would also increase accounts receivable, right? You're going to have more credit sales, you're going to generate more receivables. What will happen to the ratio? Most likely it would increase because those that are less creditworthy that would be attracted by this probably will take longer to pay than your best prime customers. Problem number 2. The Beckley Foods Company has a debt-to-assets ratio of 0.60. Its assets are financed entirely with long-term debt and common equity. What is the firm's debt-equity ratio and equity multiplier? Okay, to get the debt-equity ratio, note we're given debt to assets. Can we convert that to debt to equity? And the answer is yes, and we start with the basic accounting identity. Simply write assets equal debt plus equity. Instead of liabilities, I'm just putting debt. We're assuming debt's the only liability, okay? All right, now we can subtract debt from both sides, and we can write equity equal assets minus debt. And therefore, I can write that the debt-equity ratio is debt over, instead of equity, I'll put A minus D. So D over E is equal to D over A minus D, assets minus debt. Now let's divide both the numerator and the denominator of the right-hand side, just this portion here, by A. Okay, both the numerator and denominator will divide by A. So we get the debt-equity ratio is D over A divided by 1 minus D over A. And now we can put in the debt-equity ratio for Beckley, which is 0.6. So it's 0.6 over 1 minus 0.6 gives us a debt-equity ratio of 1.5. To compute the equity multiplier, let's again start with the basic accounting identity. We'll see here in a second, the equity multiplier is going to be A over E. Okay, we've got D over E. We've got D over A, but we don't have A over E. So we're going to again start with the basic accounting identity, assets equal debt plus equity. Now let's divide the return by E. In doing that, we get A over E, which is what we're looking for. That's the equity multiplier, is D over E, plus we'll get E over E, which is 1. So we have a very simple relationship then that the equity multiplier is a debt-equity ratio plus 1. And since we know the debt-equity ratio is 1.5, we just computed it for Beckley. Simply add 1, and we find that the equity multiplier is 2.5. I'd say it's worth remembering that expression, that A over E is D over E plus 1. The equity multiplier, not one of the more common ratios ever talked about, but it's useful when we do a DuPont analysis later. It'll come up several times during these slides as we entertain problems that have the DuPont relationship. Problem number 3. Double Eagle Golf Supply Corp has an ROA of 10% and a debt-equity ratio of 0.5. What is its return on equity? Well, the DuPont identity for return on equity takes profit margin times total asset turnover times the equity multiplier. Definitely a relationship you want to know as a financial analyst, someone who's considering financial ratios. Now, profit margin times total asset turnover is equal to return on assets. Therefore, we can write this as ROE is equal to return on assets times the equity multiplier. Now, the equity multiplier is A over E is equal to D over E plus 1. Therefore, the equity multiplier is 1.5. We were given the debt equity ratio is 0.5. So D over E 0.5 plus 1 gives us an equity multiplier, A over E, of 1.5. Therefore, if we take the ROA, which was given as 10%, multiply it by 1.5, we get an ROE of 15%. Number 4. Norman Corp reported $20 billion in total assets, $2 billion in current liabilities, $6 billion in long-term debt, and $12 billion in common equity on its most recent balance sheet. It has 800 million shares of common stock outstanding, and its stock price is $40 a share. What is Norman's market-to-book ratio? Okay, market-to-book ratio, as its name suggests, is simply market value over book value, market-to-book. The market value is $40 a share times 800 million shares, right? 800 million shares, selling at $40 a share. And the book value is simply the $12 billion of common equity on the balance sheet. So the market-to-book ratio is 2.67 times. Sometimes you'll see a little X there, 2.67 times. You can put it in, you can leave it out. I do it both ways. Alternatively, we can say market-to-book is market value per share divided by book value per share. We need to calculate book value per share then if we're going to do that. Book value per share is the $12 billion divided by the 800 million shares. It's $15 per share. Simply take the $40 market value per share divided by the $15 book value per share, and again, you get the same answer, 2.67. They're identical calculations. Number 5. A company just reported earnings per share of $3. Its book value per share is $24, and its market-to-book ratio is 1.5 times. What is its price-earnings ratio? Okay, the price-earnings ratio, as its name suggests, is price per share over earnings per share. Okay, we've got the earnings per share of $3. We need to determine price per share. Well, we're going to use the market-to-book ratio. Okay, we weren't given that just as superfluous information, although that can always certainly occur. But when you're given information like that and you don't have all you need to calculate the ratio you want, write out the ratio that you're given and see, if, like in this case, we're given 1.5, see if we know one of these and don't know the other, because that way we could calculate the other and see if that would then be useful. And that's going to be the case here. Because book value per share is $24. The ratio itself is 1.5, therefore we can calculate price per share. The price per share would be 1.5 times $24, or $36, and therefore the price-earnings ratio is $36 we just computed as the price, divided by the earnings per share which was given, and it's equal to 12.0 times. Number 6. A firm has a profit margin of 3% and an equity multiplier of 2.0. Its sales are $200 million, and it has total assets of $100 million. What is its return on equity? Okay, using the DuPont analysis equation again, the identity, return on equity is, now the standard calculation of ROE would simply be net income over total equity. But what was found is that it's actually the product of 3 other ratios, which is useful for trying to understand perhaps what's driving ROE. If ROE is increasing or decreasing, we can perhaps figure out why by looking at these other 3 ratios. Okay, that's the usefulness of the DuPont identity. Now, ROE is profit margin. We were given that, so I'm simply going to leave that as profit margin. The equity multiplier is 2, so I'll simply leave it as equity multiplier, because we can simply plug in 2 for equity multiplier and 0.03 for profit margin. We don't have the total asset turnover, so I wrote that as it's computed, which is sales over total assets. Now plugging in, ROE is 0.03, that's the profit margin that was given. 200 million for sales, 100 million over total assets, that means our total asset turnover is 2, equity multiplier is 2, and therefore ROE is 12%. Number 7, the Louis Mining Corp has $9 million in sales. Its ROE is 12%, and its total asset turnover is 3.6 times. The company's debt equity ratio is 1, and it has no preferred stock outstanding. What is its net income? Well, anytime you see ROE, and you start seeing things like debt equity ratio, total asset turnover, your mind should be moving towards thinking that we're probably using a DuPont identity to work the problem. And so I wrote down the DuPont identity again. We're given ROE is 12%, write that as a decimal, 0.12. That's equal to profit margin, which is net income over sales, so I'm simply going to write that as the ratio. We're given the total asset turnover is 3.6. We're not given the equity multiplier, but we're given the debt equity ratio. We know we can convert that very simply. Okay, we'll do that first. If the debt equity ratio is 1, remember the equity multiplier is the debt equity ratio plus 1, so the equity multiplier is going to be 2. And now we can plug in that 0.12, which is our ROE that was given, 12%, 0.12, is equal to net income over sales. We don't know net income, but we know sales is $9 million. We know the total asset turnover is 3.6. We know the equity multiplier is 2. Therefore, we can back out net income. It's $150,000. Number 8. The Duval Company reported interest expense of $300,000 and net income of $900,000 on its most recent income statement. Return on assets, ROA, was 10%. Tax rate, 40%. What is the basic earning power, BEP ratio? Well, the BEP ratio is EBIT over total assets. We need to use the above information to determine EBIT and total assets because we're not given it. Let's do total assets first. We're going to use the ROA and net income data that was given. We know ROA is net income over total assets. We were given ROA is 10%. Write that as a decimal, 0.10. We were given net income of $900,000, so we can back out total assets as being $9 million. So we've got the denominator. Now we're going to need to get EBIT. Well, EBIT is equal to net income over 1 minus T. You should remember that from assignment 1. So net income is $900,000 divided by 1 minus T. EBT is $1.5 million. Well, if we've gone from the $900,000 to EBT of $1.5 million, we were given interest expense as $300,000. That was simply given in the story problem, $300,000 interest expense. So that means EBIT is $1.8 million. So now we can compute the BEP, basic earning power ratio, by taking the EBIT that we just computed of $1.8 million and divide by the $9 million in total assets, and the BEP ratio is 20%. Number 9. Lehman Company recently reported stockholders' equity of $375 million. Its price-earnings ratio is 3.5, and its market-to-book ratio is 1.9. If Lehman has 5 million common shares outstanding, what is the price per share of its common stock? Okay, the market-to-book ratio is given as 1.9, so let's write that out. And let's just state this by stating it in terms of market value of equity. If I multiply both sides by book value of equity, let's say it that way, I get market value of equity is book value of equity times the market-to-book ratio. So the market value of equity is the $375,000 book value of equity times the market-to-book ratio. So you can see a market-to-book ratio simply allows you to convert book value to market value. It's the multiplier. So the market value of equity is $712.5 million. And therefore the market value per share will be the $712,500,000 divided by the 5 million shares of common stock. The market price per share is $142.50. Alternatively, we could have calculated book value per share by taking the $375 million and dividing by the 5 million shares. Book value per share is $75. Simply multiply book value per share times the market to book ratio. Remember I said that's kind of a multiplier. gets the price of $142.50. Kind of like this alternative solution, maybe a little better. Okay, number 10. Lloyd Incorporated has sales of $200,000, net income of $15,000, and the following balance sheet. Okay, and we've got cash, receivables, and inventories, which we could sum and calculate current assets. It would be, what, $210,000. Total assets of $300,000. And then over here we have accounts payable, other current liabilities, long-term debt, common equity, and we've got the total assets being equal to total liabilities and equity of $300,000. Now the new owner thinks that inventories are excessive, and at first glance, I think I tend to agree. Half of the firm's total assets are tied up in inventories. That's expensive. Inventory is not earning much of a rate of return on it. It's not earning any rate of return on it, except if it's increasing in price as it sits. Sometimes the opposite happens, right? So the new owner thinks inventories are excessive and can be lowered to the point where the current ratio is equal to the industry average 2.5 times. And this can be done without affecting sales or net income. If inventories are sold and not replaced, simply sell off the inventory and generate cash and not replenish the inventories. It's going to lower the level. So if inventories are sold and not replaced, thus reducing the current ratio 2.5 times, if the funds generated are used to reduce common equity, assuming stock can be repurchased at book value, and if no other changes occur, by how much will the ROE change? So they're going to start selling the inventory without replacing it. With the cash that they get, they're going to repurchase shares of stock at book value. So we're assuming that the market value to book value ratio is 1 here. Okay. How much would that cause return on equity to change? And then what would be the firm's new quick ratio? Okay, well the current ratio is simply current assets over current liabilities. If the target is 2.5, well, cash is $10,000, accounts receivable is $50,000. What level of inventories in the numerator would make this ratio with current liabilities equal to $50,000 equal to 2.5, right? Because this would be the current assets, cash, receivables, inventories, that when we divide by current liabilities needs to be 2.5. We can solve that in for inventories. This is some simple algebra here, and we get inventories of $65,000. We weren't asked to do this, but I went ahead and created a new balance sheet. Okay, so the inventories goes from 150 down to 65,000, so it went down by 85,000, right? Well, what happens then is common equity gets reduced by 85,000. On the previous slide, that was 200,000. It's now 115,000. So both inventory and common equity both declined by 85,000, and total assets and total liabilities and equity went down by 85,000. So that's the new inventory level. The previous ROE was net income. We were given net income of 15,000. The previous equity was 200,000. Our previous ROE was 7.5%. The new ROE, remember we were told that they felt that net income would not be changed by these actions of selling off inventory. But now equity has been reduced from 200,000 to 115,000. The new ROE is about 13%. If you had 13.0, that's fine. Okay, so the change is about 5.5%. The quick ratio would be current assets minus inventories over current liabilities. Take the current assets of 125, subtract the inventories, divide by the current liabilities, and the quick ratio would be 1.20 times. Okay? This ends Solutions to Assignment 2 Financial Ratios, Part 1.